çıkarak buralarda neleri yapabiliriz, neleri yapmayabiliriz açısından oldukça önemli bir konuşma olduğunu düşünüyorum. Kendisi sahneye aldı. Teşekkürler. Sağ olun.
Is this the right time? Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Thank you very much for joining us. And first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's a distinct honor to be invited to speak at this conference about a topic that lies close to my heart personally, and that is what to do with mines once we're done with them. I think we've heard many of the key points that I'll touch on today in yesterday's presentations. Mines are in some places considered a temporary land use. It's just a way to use the land until something else comes. And I'd like to encourage us all to think about mines in that way. So let's see if I can get you oriented. My name is Herman. As you've heard, I come from a little country called South Africa. Just to orient you, we are at the very bottom end of Africa, and we have 9 provinces in the country. I hear that I can point there. I think you know these chaps to help you know who South Africa is and what we're about. And I don't have a very complex presentation for you today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the mining history in South Africa, and then I'm going to hopefully inspire you with some of the cases of things that we've done with mines after they've closed. So let's get right into it. I prefer to just speak and you can read at your own pace. South Africa was mined for many, many years since the Stone Age for things like copper and other such minerals. When the first European settlers arrived in the country in the 1600s, the late 1600s, they very quickly discovered tin and silver. But it's not really since the Industrial Revolution started exhausting the coal supplies in Scotland specifically that we had an influx of geologists and mining engineers that came to the country that systematically started to explore the country and very quickly discovered coal and things. And then, of course, my hometown, Kimberley, where the first diamonds were discovered, that created an absolute rush of people to the country. And of course, with that influx of people brought more geologists, and those geologists in very short order discovered gold and platinum. And that set the scene for South Africa to become a mining destination of international repute. Even today, South Africa has the world's largest known resources of chrome, platinum group metals, vanadium. If you're getting any of those minerals, thank you, from anywhere, then it's probably come from South Africa. You really are too kind. So this more than a century of mining has left us with a legacy of about 6,000 abandoned mines, and we have to find something to do with them. Now, I'm going to talk you through some of the examples. The mine closure legislation in South Africa, of course, is much the same as it's in the rest of the world. There's nothing occult or funny going on there. I want to start on a lighter note with things that you can use an old mine for. And the one thing that's using an old mine is for hiding important things. Some of you may know that chap off I'm going to skip forward now. It's not what I wanted to do. Some of you may know that guy, Winston Churchill, when he was running away from the Boers during the Anglo-Boer War after he'd escaped from prison. He was hiding away in a coal mine to make his way back to England, where he eventually became prime minister and defeated Hitler and those sorts of things. So you can hide important things in mines. And then, of course, during the apartheid regime, the government of the time during the 1960s were hiding their strategic oil reserve down old coal mines. So in the very first place, and as I say on a lighter note, mines are good for hiding things that are important to you. In terms of land use after closure, in most cases, I think we'll agree it's not possible to return the land if it's been disturbed back to entirely its natural state and its natural carrying capacity. But you try and return it as far as is possible to an acceptable end state, and that can be an alternative land use. We don't have to go to agriculture or some other uses, and the focus of my presentation is really to look at those more creative uses. Recently, we've also started looking at biodiversity offsets, where you acknowledge that the mine is
certain parts of the land will never return to its natural carrying capacity or utility, and therefore you will rather improve another piece of land and accept that this piece is not going to be in its full capacity ever again. So alternative land uses have been proposed and tried that have failed, but some others have been successful, and the cases that I want to show you serve to inspire and to educate so that we can talk together, and I'm not going to focus on the boring land uses of agriculture. I'm going to talk more about the creative ones. And first of all, we should talk about failures as well. It doesn't always work. This one is a project that I've been involved in a little town called Priska, which is almost in the center of the country. There, I put a little dot everywhere so that you can follow me around the country as we hold these examples. It was mined, and this was the mill site. It was a site where asbestos from the surrounding area was brought to the mill, very heavily polluted, and we tried to create a park there for the community at the request of the municipality. So most of the presentation is really just some pictures. This is in the town, and we put up a fence and some stormwater drainage. We covered the entire area to immobilize the asbestos fibers, and the idea was to create a park for the community there. Why it failed is that everything was stolen 3 years later. Everything was broken down and carried off. Why? Because no one took care of this facility. No one was directly responsible and capacitated to take care of the facility. If you leave this to someone, the lesson here is if you leave this to the municipality, even if they agree, if they don't have the budget and the skilled people to take care of it properly, it's going to fail. Let's move on to some better examples. This is my hometown, Kimberley, right in the middle of the country where diamonds were first discovered, as I said before, which drew all the geologists into the area. Now, the big hole, as we call it, for lack of a better name, because it's a really big hole, was dug by hand, and it remains, as far as I know, the biggest man-made, not with machinery, hand-dug man-made hole in the world. So it is currently you'll see the town right on the edge there, and there's actually some seismic monitors around it to make sure that we look at this thing, because there is a risk that it can collapse further and actually endanger some of the buildings there. But underneath, so above ground, there's a museum, and it's a protected natural landmark. We're not going to do anything with the hole. I see my one picture is corrupted there, but don't let that bother you too much. So above ground, you have a tourist attraction. Tourists come there, but what they don't know is that underground, when we started measuring, and that's the image that got corrupted a little bit, but you're not missing much. It's a flat line, and that plots temperature and humidity. Day and night, summer and winter, stays exactly the same. And you know what that's good for? Is for growing mushrooms. You don't need to do anything fancy there. Your temperature control's already in place. So the site is producing oyster mushrooms under the mushrooms for the table market underneath the city, which I find very interesting. Diepkloof asbestos mine, another one in the province of Mpumalanga up to the northeast. Very, very large asbestos mine that used the block cave mining method up to the surface, and when they stopped dewatering this thing, it flooded naturally. Today, Diepkloof is an international dive training site. There are some images there they have, and of course, as the stopes have been worked out underneath, it's an almost textbook perfect dive training site for nitrox divers. So they go there and they do their training. The water's lovely and clear, and it's a lovely setting. The asbestos exposure is not really an issue underground, underwater, and above ground the asbestos has been rehabilitated. So an old mine that's actively being used for something interesting. Fish farming. Some of the gold processing plants designed for the circulation of liquids in the gold mining extraction process, gold extraction process. They have these chemical settling ponds, and that's ideal for managing the conditions for fish farming. So there's an image of this Wits mine, these settling ponds specifically, and there's a few numbers there of how many people it employs, the turnover. And in the process, and here's where the accounting becomes interesting, is not only does this now generate money, but you've avoided closure costs, and I think we must think of it in a balance sheet sort of way. when we consider these plans is how much are you avoiding enclosure costs at the same time if you can integrate it like that. So yeah, some lovely koi for your garden pond being grown there. Out on the west coast, we have a case of De Beers at the time, which had created a small mining town for their coastal diamond mining operations, a town called Kleinseer. And they'd been mining this thing for decades. And the aquaculture, the pumping infrastructure was there, the ponds were already created. And you can then turn this was turned into, again, a farm creating seaweed or growing seaweed and shellfish, employing over 50 people. And it allowed the town to continue existing so that they can then explore options for tourism in that area. Ultra-deep underground pumped energy storage. As you know, South Africa is home to the deepest mines in the world. We mine gold currently at a level of almost 4,000 meters below surface. And it becomes very interesting. This one has not gotten off the ground yet, but it's currently in feasibility stage to look at whether we can use energy when it's cheap and available. Because you know, probably if you've been following news about South Africa, we've been battling with energy. So what you do is you use the energy and this head of water and the infrastructure that's there already to gravity feed the water back through turbines during times when you need a boost in energy. And you balance the energy load through that mechanism. There's a couple of others, and really I've spoken about most of them. Belleville Stone Quarry was turned into a shopping mall. Pretoria Stone Quarry is now a retirement estate. So that brings me to the end of the examples and really talking about the acceptability of post-closure land uses. It's my view that mine closure all over the world is a well-known and documented process. There's a lot of convergence, whether you go to Argentina or Egypt or South Africa or perhaps Turkey. Well, mine closure is known and understood. There's a lot of regulation, even international guidance about what you should be doing at mine closure. The state of the environment left after mining and the infrastructure that you leave, though, is left in a community that was not there when you started and conceived this mine. Society has moved on. They've grown up around this mine, but they've moved on. Their thinking has moved on. And in today's rapid consumption culture, where social media influences a very strong force, the right decisions need to be taken. And keep in mind, the utility of this infrastructure, the usefulness, will be decided by this generation, not the past one that created the mine. So a mine that delivers utility and compliance with the modern social norms has the best chance of finding a sustainable end use. And that requires building capacity outside of mines. And it takes a deliberate effort. It takes a concerted effort to understand what it is that you're going to do. And you can't do it as a mining company alone, in my view. You will have to involve society. You will have to involve the institutions that grow up around this mine. And I want to venture the opinion that mining people may perhaps not have the right skill set to determine what should be done with mines after closure and for the long term, because it requires social media engagement. It requires transfers of the management of these facilities in a sustainable manner to those that will be left behind. And I want to close by bringing you two perspectives from my side, the one being about critical mass and the other one about span of control. When I say critical mass, mining towns create themselves. You know, you have a mine that starts from exploration, you start bringing in all the technical people you need, and it grows from there. The presence of the mine attracts other people and other industries and other services and other skills to the mine. So, and these things have nothing to do with mines, they just serve the population that's there, and it's hairdressers and schools and universities and funeral undertakers, anything you can imagine will eventually come to a mining town if it's large enough. And those industries diversify and they eventually cover all the services that normal mining towns have, and it creates opportunities to diversify and reintegrate the post-mining land use. The longer the town exists and the larger it gets, the better your chances of diversifying and getting into alternative end land uses that are going to be sustainable. And that's what I mean with critical mass. The capacity of the institutions and the professionals around the mine that they've attracted will help determine what's capable, what's possible to be done in that area. And I want to use two examples, and that's Johannesburg, which today is a global city and has completely diversified its economy away from mining, and Bakerville, which no one knows now, but at some stage was home to 120,000 people. Today it's nothing. It's a patch in the dirt. There's nothing there anymore. Bakerville once had 13 schools. And the second point I want to make and really drive home is about span of control. I think as a mining company, it's important when you think about post-mining land use to think about what it is that is in your control and what is not in your control. The things that are in your control, completely in your control, are the physical properties of the infrastructure and the landscape that you leave behind. So it requires you to plan for closure and life after mining. And the design for alternative end states, I think it requires for you to remain flexible and to remain open to listen to the people around you and say, well, we would have utility of this or that facility that you leave behind. Creativity, use the right people in the team that's going to determine what's going to happen after post-mining, and preparation of the financial, human resource, and institutional support structures after closure. That is completely within your control, but it requires your planning and your engagement. And finally, understanding the accounting trade-offs. Mines have very good accountants because it's a business, and it's often a very cutthroat business. So understanding what the trade-offs are, how much you can save in closure by doing something else with the land use is really quite important. What is mostly but not completely in your control is community acceptance of your suggestions. You can manage the expectations and continuously engage with the community, and that relationship can only be improved with continuous engagement. And then finally, what's not in your control. What's not in your control is the legislative and regulatory environment that allows for alternative land uses after mine closure. But I will state from my experience that any of the governments that I've been working with ever will be acceptive of solutions for post-mining land use because they need the revenue stream and their constituents need the employment. So that brings me really to the end of what I had to share with you today. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Herman, no, you don't go. Please stay. Thank you. I was wondering if there is any questions from the floor about the South African experience, because obviously the country has been mining for decades and maybe a couple of centuries, maybe even. And so we got to learn from their own lessons. And so I would appreciate if there are a few questions from the floor.
Stunned silence is always good.
No, Caner Bey is asking a question.
Arkadaşlar, Ahmet.
Okay, Caner Zandbak. Well, thank you very much for this very informative, especially the last part was very informative for me. The first parts, okay, good case histories. Asbestos mines, not an issue actually. It's nothing to be scared of, as they say that it's a killer and this and that, but it's an easy to manage. But here's my question for the last slide you have. What is not mostly in your control issue? How easy or how difficult is it to manage that aspect? Community, communication with the community, and handshaking with the community, and acceptance. How easy is it compared to any other country you may know of?
In South Africa, it's particularly complex, and it goes to the extent that I'm very concerned that you use the word easy in that question. We're a very, very diverse group of cultures living together, and there will forever be someone who pulls in a different direction. My experience is that the community, in any project development, it's not just mining, the community is the one party you will engage with that doesn't play by a rule book. If you engage an engineer, if you sign up an engineer, there's a contract. If you have a project sponsor, there's a contract. The contract determines how the two parties will behave towards each other. The community doesn't have a contract. They can do whatever they like. They can set fire to your plant or put sugar in your diesel, or they can steal your fences overnight or slash your fences because you didn't use people from both political parties in the labor pool. I know because it's happened to me. So the community is the one that always comes up with surprises. It's not easy. It is easier in countries, and again through my experience, I've seen it's easier in countries that come from a very strong command and control sort of government, who are used to almost, and I'm putting it very simplistically, I don't mean to offend, but used to government telling them this is how you behave, sort of thing. And it's also easier in countries with not monotonous is not the right word, but with a uniform culture, where people sort of think the same. The more the cultures differ, the more difficult it becomes. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it gives you some insight. Okay.
There are two more questions.
Thank you so much, Herman. This is Metin Aktan. I wonder about, actually, yesterday the same question were asked. Is there any funds or finance for reclamation or post-mining activities which is taken from the companies before operating the mines?
Yes, in South Africa it works like this. Until 2002, the current thinking is that until 2002, the legislation didn't tie down exactly it was actually before then, but through some lawyers interpreting the law. I don't want to get into the long discussion, but let's say in the past, companies did have financial provision actually since the 90s, but it wasn't tied down very well and linked to the mine closure legislation. So now you have it much better controlled. Old mines are rehabilitated by the government, where you cannot find the owner and keep him legally accountable. For new mines, there's a provision. The mine must make provision themselves, and what they do with that mine, and this is actually quite a big industry in South Africa, is to diversify those assets away from the mine as you approach closure, so that you avoid that massive closure cost. So yes, you will still go through closure. There will be infrastructure that no one else can use, or features that are dangerous perhaps to leave behind, and for that you have to make financial provision. You still have to close the mine, but there's nothing that stops you from doing creative things like this, to diversify away, to chip away at what's left behind that you have to close. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. I mean, as a necessity before operating the mines, for example, 10% or 30% of the whole project?
It varies. There's actually a formula that's applied to how you calculate what must be set aside even before you get the license. It's a license condition. So you must have some provision for closure at the time when you get your license. Yeah.
There was another question, I think, from Dimitris. You're okay?
I think that you have already answered my question, but let's repeat it. I'm Dimitris Kaliampakos. I'm from Greece. I'm running a project like one of these ones. So my question is, who is the driving force behind this rehabilitation project? Who is the owner? But I guess that you answered that it is the government.
No, not necessarily. The mining companies themselves projects like these become flagship projects in their environmental and social governance. They love to put things like these in their sustainable development reports. So your big mining companies actually make some investment, and they make a lot of effort engaging with the community to understand what it is that they want. The government are driven by different objectives. When we close mines, and I've been involved with several rehabilitation projects on behalf of the government, the driving force there becomes responsibility with taxpayers' money. So you can't really do many creative things simply because you're accountable for the money that you spend. In the case of asbestos mines, of which I've rehabilitated over 30, the question becomes how, in South Africa, with a very big social developmental drive, the issue is you're spending, let's call it €1 million on the site. How many hospital beds could we provide for that? How many houses could we have built for that? You understand, when you're engaging with government accountants, that's the sort of questions that you have to answer. So you must account for the value that you've delivered. And then it becomes difficult to spend taxpayers' money on creative projects. So it's mostly the private sector that do these sorts of things. Does that answer your question? Yes. Good.
Herman, I'm going to pick up from Janet Bay's question. I think that is the very critical question that we all miners need to think deeply. We got to admit, we are not the best communicators in the world when it comes to, explaining our existence and also the value of the mining projects. In your opinion, from the South African experience, who are the best communicators to explain the value of the projects to the local community and rest of the society? Not necessarily the mining engineers or geologists, etc., but when you think, I think maybe we need to employ communication experts.
It helps a lot. We have, actually in South Africa, there's a small company that I've worked with who actually, this is their niche business, is communicating mining outcomes to communities. That's what they do. But mining companies have taken great strides to actually employ specialist communicators and engage with the communities directly. We understand a lot about traditional community leadership structures, for example, in mining in South Africa. I wouldn't be able to single out a particular person or a particular group of people who can do that for you, but I think it's very local, very dependent on what the local conditions and culture is.
Well, I think we can conclude this part of the session. Thank you very much, Herman. Most appreciate. Before you leave, we got to give you something. So. I don't know. This is the first time. There we go.